Welcome to High Infidelity, the best cheating videos on YouTube. If you enjoy this content, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now let's get into the video.
I came back from the dead and nuked ex-fiance's life insurance money plans, Part 2. I departed that afternoon and made my way to the lodge, where I checked in. Now, I'll mainly the next bit since I'm not sure whether it was legal or illegal or anything. But fast forward 6 months and I have a new name and reside in a new location where I was able to begin my IT job and was slowly working my way back to my former salary position. I began monitoring my ex on Facebook and other social media platforms. I'm not going to lie, it was therapeutic to say the least. The commotion of them attempting to get into accounts must have been awful, and she realized that our seemingly secure funds were not that secure after all. It's really nasty to beg for money on Facebook. Again, I won't go into the legalities, but a number of people went searching for me, and I debated calling the cops to let them know I was all right, but opted against it. Eventually had to pay a hefty fine for this, but it was well worth it. I worked hard on myself and got into terrific condition. I had lost my faith and had devolved into a hedonistic existence. I had faded into obscurity. I stalked this lady for over a year after learning she was seeing a new person and became pregnant almost immediately. Of course, my mother was still in her life, looking after my alleged children while she was doing who knows what. On the 1-year anniversary of my departure, she created a memorial page for me. This convinced me that my vengeance was not yet complete, and I decided to phone my brother and inform him that I was still alive. My brother and I had grown apart over the previous 10 years, but he was blood and had always been there for me when I was younger. I explained why I did what I did, and when we caught up, I requested him not to tell anybody yet, and he agreed. But then he informed me about my mother and ex-fiancé suing my insurance company to force them to respect my life insurance policy. Despite the high expense, she had managed to maintain this policy in place. If she won, the payment would be large, 7 figures, and she would be reimbursed the premiums she had paid since my purported death. So, since I am not the kind of uncivilized person who would deceive an insurance provider, I began my preparations. When I found out she had an approaching hearing, I traveled the 1,000 miles to my former city, listening to Highway to Hell half the way down. I arrived to the court early and sat down. At this point, I had a beard, had shed 60 pounds, and was generally in excellent shape. My fiancé and mother walked straight by me in the courtroom without even looking at me. I assumed they'd be meeting in a large courtroom, and I was already going to storm in and say something about protesting and being a cringe-lord, as is my custom. However, they found themselves in a tiny room with several insurance company attorneys. I decided to frick it and repeatedly pounded on the door until they opened it. They were all perplexed to see this scraggly dressed guy with a beard, and I just said, "I think you are attempting to resolve the question of whether or not I am dead." My ex-fiancé recognized me very instantly and put out a gasp or something. But the attorneys were just perplexed. When everyone stepped outside the room, a whirlwind developed and the bailiffs were summoned. My ex shouted and slapped me, and they had to use handcuffs to restrain her. This must have been a major matter for the insurance company, since the lawyer's boss/client really came there and demanded statements and everything. Even a detective came there, which made me regret going, but I gave my testimony and did not lie about anything, though I was imprecise about where I was now residing. I ended up staying in town for over a month, and it was an insane month at a cheap hotel. I gave proof of my ex's adultery to everyone who would listen, and I attempted to meet with the kids, but the youngest did not recognize me, and the then 7-year-old told me to F myself, which I suppose is fair. The cops were furious and filed a civil suit for the expenses of looking for me. A detective or something even flew in from another state to interview me. Fortunately, I did not get arrested at this period because I did not want my fingerprints associated with my new name. Essentially, I had to pay a big fine, which I instantly paid in cash, much to the amazement of the cops. As far as I was concerned, I had had enough of this place. My ex-fiancé served me with a civil lawsuit for a variety of reasons, and my mother assisted, but I was a leaf in the wind for a long time before anything came of it. I'm back in my new city and have no plans to leave. After a few months of damaging her insurance plans, I quit spying on them and went on with my life. This occurred a few years ago, and I'm much better off today, but I'm exhausted and need to sleep. If there is enough interest, I will tell you what happened to me after all of this. Update. I won't mention anything about how to vanish since we can't discuss possible crimes on this board, but check up the story of Barsky, a former KGB agent who entered the US and gained credentials. Millions of illegal immigrants do this in order to work for firms in the United States. Uncle Sam just wants his taxes paid. I'm not sure about the specifics of the insurance inquiry or how they were searching for me, but I never received a phone contact from them before seeing them in person. I no longer want to pursue vengeance since I now think that violent joys have violent endings. As far as I'm concerned, my ex-life fiancé is already difficult, and anything extra I did would only harm the children. After things with my ex blew out, I left town, stopped communicating with my brother, and even stopped checking in on the situation with my ex. Starting afresh in the world without family or friends is lonely and scary, but also exhilarating and optimistic. So, did I restart my life after moving to a new city? Well, I had a lot of money in cash that I used to stay in a hotel for a few months, while I sorted out all my paperwork and searched for a job. I couldn't prepare much of this ahead of time, since I assumed my home computer would be checked if I went missing. I learned that it was tough to obtain a job with my ability if you didn't have a college degree to your name. So I decided to start my own business and post adverts for jobs such as building up custom dispatch software, producing films and presentations, and so on. I only got a couple different jobs like this, and they didn't even cover my living costs. After a few gigs for the same firm, I made friends with a project manager and was recruited at a decent pay. My finances are still only around 70% of what they were before, but I am content with what I have. I spent a lot of time on the internet looking for individuals with similar situations and finally became associated with a men going their own way MGTO organization. We essentially just spewed nonsense about women all the time, and the positive feedback loop turned me into a rather resentful/misogynistic person. I went so far as to create phony profiles to harass women online that I don't want to go into more detail since I am humiliated and sorry right now. To make up for missed time, I joined Tinder and began up with women. Throwing money around and lying to them became a way of life for me, and I cheated on almost every woman I met because I assumed they were all doing it as well. When I was caught, I pretended I didn't understand why they were upset with me until they left or attempted to forgive me only for me to do it again. This is also not something I am proud of. A few years back, one of the ladies I was sleeping with on a regular basis became pregnant and came to me with the good news. I quickly accused her of cheating and tossed her out of my flat, and all she could do was stare in disbelief. Remember, I believed I was infertile, so I mentally replaced her with another thought. I kept mocking her for a while more, even messaging my MGTO friends about it. I honestly admitted to cheating on her and showed her the evidence. I consented to a paternity test while she was still pregnant because I didn't want her to engage the courts, and the results surprised me. I sobbed and attempted to embrace her, but she shouted, threw papers at me, and said she didn't want to see me again. I went home and drank, delighted that I was finally going to be a father. For real this time, but unhappy about who I had become. I don't want you to root for me because, as I already said, I am not a decent guy. She wouldn't even talk to me long enough for me to explain my behavior for the rest of the pregnancy, but I completely understood why. When the kid, a girl, was born, I went to the hospital to sign the birth certificate while also meeting with her lawyer, who turned out to be her sister, to go through child support issues that we had previously discussed. I went for a Hail Mary and promised to sign whatever document they wanted in exchange for 30 minutes of coffee with me to explain things. She wanted full custody and generous payments. I never hired a lawyer because all I wanted to do was make apologies, and I assumed a lawyer would put up roadblocks in order to protect myself or my wealth. I met with her for coffee, and to my amazement, she let me talk for about 20 minutes without interruption. I didn't tell her all about my background, but she understood why I needed a paternity test, but she didn't justify my actions in insulting her, tossing her out, and cheating. I signed the paperwork, but begged her to allow me see and interact with my kid. She said that I was unstable and that I would need rigorous counseling before that could happen. Of course, I went along with the counseling. I learned a lot in therapy and did a lot of study on the consequences of infidelity and other such things. Turns out there are a lot of women who have been injured by cheaters and homewreckers as well, obvious, and my perspective on women was poisonous to say the least. I ended it with my MGTOW pals because I feared the environment would hinder my growth. I don't want to go after that gang because I believe there are some nice individuals among them who are simply shattered and seeking for solutions. Having a baby girl was a great kick in the stomach for me to stop treating women so badly. When my daughter was 7 months old, I was finally permitted to see her and started supervised visits every other weekend. I had properly paid the child support and made every effort to communicate with her mother and make apologies. We got intoxicated one night after our daughter and began kissing, which escalated into. When we awoke the following morning, she was enraged and simply asked me to go, but she seemed to want to make things work. We moved in together when she lost her job to COVID-19. After a long period, and we are now living together. Her family despises me, which has prevented us from ever discussing marriage. I even missed our daughter's second birthday party because her lawyer sister refused to meet me. I'm hoping everything works out for me, and I know I'm already getting more than I deserve. For the time being, the epidemic has me working from home, while my lady looks after our kid and prepares meals for me. She is still skeptical of me and comes into my office on a regular basis to check what I am up to, which I don't mind. For the time being, I'm simply going to attempt to be there for my kid and make amends with her mother. I'm still trying to come up with things to do or say, but for the time being, I'm still in Zoom treatment and doing my best. I don't believe I'll ever be able to tell everyone everything, which is why I chose to tell Reddit strangers. I apologize to everyone who felt I was a hero after reading my first post. Please don't let your animosity fester within you. Friends, I nearly lost out on something wonderful, and I could still lose out if I'm not cautious. Unless I come back years later to tell you all what happened, this will be the last update. Best wishes to everyone. Someone reminded me that the spy I was thinking of was Jack Barsky, not Yuri Bismenov.